hello out there. Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Jessica Pham and I will be moderating today's webinar, A New Way with CBA, Phishing-Resistant Authentication, Authentication to Mobile. Missed that part. Brought to you by Axiad and our friends at Yubico. We have today, after some quick intros from our speakers, we will be presenting on everything phishing-resistant MFA, what it is, some interesting trends we're seeing, its requirements, components, and what you'll need to achieve it. Then we'll cover how CBA fits into the picture, and then we'll put our technical hats on as our presenters. We'll guide you through how to deploy a YubiKey for authentication with their certificate provisioned and managed by Axiad Cloud. Finally, towards the end, we will be hosting a live Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the talk, please submit them early and through the questions icon to your right. Also, if you have any technical difficulties throughout the webinar, you can click the support icon in the lower right corner of your screen. Now it is my pleasure to introduce you to Axiad's own Partner Integrations Manager, Scott Truger. He works very closely with our awesome partners such as Yubico to ensure our products work well together and we are meeting our customers' needs. And joining us today from Yubico is Shakeel Aziz, Resident Solutions Engineer, helping organizations elevate their security posture, meet compliance requirements, and adopt zero trust framework principles by modernizing authentication with YubiKeys. So now that you know a little bit about our speakers, I will pass it off to them to get us started. Scott, I think you have the next slide here.
All right, thanks, Jessica, for the introduction.
Yeah, of course.
Very excited to talk to you guys today about certificate-based authentication on mobile. But just to get started, a little bit about Axiad. So we provide a cloud-hosted platform called Axiad Cloud. It's a dedicated instance for each customer. It's not a shared environment. And this ensures a high level of security across the enterprise environment. So we manage the operations and security infrastructure of the systems and services that customers can use to securely connect people and machines to the resources they need to use to get their work done. This includes things like handling credential issuance, renewal, recovery, and deployment of those credentials across the enterprise. Axiad Cloud allows you to see all the levers that you can push and pull to secure your enterprise authentication, things such as credentials that have been issued to users, enrollment and credential renewal policy enforcement, and a self-service portal for users to manage their credentials. And of course, we'll get into all those details later on in the presentation. That was just a little introduction.
Thank you, Scott and Jessica. So a little bit about Yubico. Yubico has won 19 of the 20 largest tech companies as customers and partners, and 4,500 businesses and millions of end users across 160 countries have put an end to account takeovers with YubiKeys. The YubiKey is the world's first and most advanced security key. Works on every computing platform with every major identity access management solution and over 800 applications. We have a strong global presence with the majority of our team in California and Sweden. So if we start in May of 2021, President Biden issued an executive order known as 14028, improving the nation's cybersecurity, which called on the federal government to protect against increasingly sophisticated malicious cyber campaigns that threaten the public and private sector, and ultimately our security and privacy. As part of cybersecurity modernization efforts, the order called for the adoption of security best practices and advancement towards a zero trust architecture, specifically around cloud computing, of which a key component highlighted was the adoption of multi-factor authentication. In January of last year, acting on the mandate set out by the executive order, the Office of Management Budget released a memo outlining a baseline for the federal government and agencies to act in accordance with modernization efforts and adoption of a zero trust security architecture. The strategy places significant emphasis on stronger enterprise identity and access controls, including multi-factor authentication, and prioritizes defense against sophisticated phishing. It goes on to state that strong authentication is a necessary component of a zero trust architecture, and multi-factor authentication will be a critical part of the federal government security baseline. In addition, it highlights that MFA will generally protect against some common methods of gaining unauthorized account access, such as guessing weak passwords or reusing passwords obtained from a data breach. However, many approaches to multi-factor authentication will not protect against sophisticated phishing attacks, which can convincingly spoof official applications and involve dynamic user interaction, where users can be fooled with providing a one-time code or responding to a security prompt that grants the attacker account access. These attacks can be fully automated and operate cheaply at significant scale. And finally, agency systems must discontinue support for authentication methods failing to resist phishing, including protocols that register phone numbers or SMS or voice calls, supply one-time codes, or receive push notifications. This requirement for phishing-resistant methods is necessitated by the reality that enterprise users are amongst the most valuable targets for phishing, a problem that can be mitigated by providing users with phishing-resistant authenticators. In addition, CISA has stated that phishing-resistant MFA is the gold standard, and organizations should make transitioning to it a high priority effort. So what is phishing-resistant MFA? If we look at the latest update from NIST with respect to the 800-63B digital identity guidelines, it defines phishing-resistant as the ability of the authentication protocol to detect and prevent disclosure of authentication secrets and valid authenticator outputs to an imposter relying party without the reliance on the vigilance of the subscriber. So that definition can be broken down into 5 key components. First, phishing-resistant authentication is based on a trust relationship. There is a strong binding between the user and the relying party. This is achieved through a cryptographic registration process that can include an identity proofing process, in addition to registering a user's authenticator for strong binding. Second, there are no shared secrets. The trust relationship allows for the authentication mechanism to be based on unique public-private key pairs that perform a secure asymmetric cryptographic ceremony. Third, it's possession-based. The authentication ceremony can never be performed without the private key, which is stored in hardware that can be attested and is not exportable. Fourth, awareness of the transacting parties means that phishing-resistant MFA methods respond to only valid requests from known and trusted parties, making it verifier impersonation resistant. And finally, intent. User involvement is required to both initiate and authorize a login action, which needs to be clearly understood by the user.
All right, thanks for that kind of cool framework of what MFA is and some drivers around it. So what does that come down to? What are the options, right? And Shakeel mentioned that certificate-based authentication and FIDO authentication. To be honest, I struggled with this slide, whether or not this should be one slide for each or just leave it as one slide together because it's a lot to read. But I think the point is that both of these are the options, right? And I left it together so you can kind of compare and contrast some differences between the two, which we'll just touch on quickly. So CBA, certificate-based authentication, commonly known as PIV, CAC, smart card deployments. This is widely adopted across the world in probably every industry. It's very well known. The model of deployment is kind of an administrator model or kind of a centralized model where you have that certificate authority, certificate management system, pushing out those certificates to where they're going to be used, and those authentication systems checking back in, right? So it's a kind of a centralized administrator model for how it actually operates, which does require some level of PKI infrastructure. So there's a infrastructure kind of cost. But it is a standardized implementation, which is fantastic. So it's a kind of well-known quantity just for deployments. which really leads into its use for meeting those compliance and security and audit standards, because it's all standardized, been used across industries. It's fairly easy to meet those compliance and security requirements because it's been deployed so often and kind of been through the kind of rigor of meeting those requirements. FIDO is the up-and-coming standard for the enterprise. It's pretty well known and established for phishing-resistant authentication in the consumer space. And so why is it up-and-coming for the enterprise? And that's really to the adoption of the standards as they're rolling out. It may not be supported in all of those systems across the enterprise because it's relatively new. There's a big difference when you're trying to wrap your head around the deployment model around FIDO versus CBA. And it's more of a self-service or decentralized model in that the FIDO authenticator itself is registered directly to the authentication service. So it's more of a one-to-one. Right? So in contrasting that to certificate-based authentication, where you have a certificate that's issued to you, and wherever that's trusted, it can just be used. It's almost kind of like magic as an end user, right? But in FIDO, that authenticator itself needs to be registered each time to where you're going to use it. For enterprise deployments, you can use federation to narrow that, but from a deployment consideration or deployment kind of mindset, it is a little bit of a different model to wrap your head around. One of my favorite things about FIDO, I think it's very elegant in its flexibility for different implementations and what the standard actually allows. It's everything from, and this is at the standards level, right? So this is single factor authentication, like a tap and go, second factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, passwordless authentication, usernameless authentication. So there's all these awesome kind of options and flexibility in how it's actually implemented. They all may not meet that phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication, but it is an awareness that there's a huge amount of flexibility. And in my mind, that really comes into that adoption for the compliance, in that it is so flexible. It requires an extra level of rigor when you're deploying it in the enterprise to ensure that it's going to meet those compliance and security requirements. It can, but you need to really, really make sure that the implementation you're deploying does. And so at the end, both of these are your options for phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. You can choose one, you can choose the other, you can choose both in your deployment. And it really comes down to what are those deployment considerations.
To watch the full video, click the link below to our Bright Talk channel. For more Axiad content, click subscribe.